All right, thank you everyone for waiting for our latecomers to join. We're going to go ahead and get started now. My name is Ann Schaefer. I am the Senior Customer Success Specialist here at MarketSight. Today we're going to be covering, of course, sharing our insights and our findings in MarketSight by using our Key Findings platform. If you have any questions as we go through the topic today, please feel free to send those to our chat or to us by email. We'll do our best to answer the general questions during the session. And of course, if you have a very specific question or one that's particular to a project, we'll follow up with you by email afterwards. All right, so let's go ahead and get started here. What we are looking at now, essentially the reporting process in MarketSight that leads up to key findings begins with uploading your data. Once you've uploaded the data into MarketSight, you can use the application to create crosstabs and find your important results. These can then be placed into charts, and you can make dashboards or have the MarketSight design team make dashboards for you. Once you have all of these findings in place and the visualizations in place, you then can add them to our Key Findings portal, which is something that you can share with your clients for free. Let's take a quick look at the Key Findings portal briefly for those of you who have not yet seen that side of the product. Now, this is the Key Findings portal as you or I, a full access user, would see this. We're essentially going to go through today's project as though we are adding an item to Key Findings here. We're going to discuss setting up a user and a group so that we can control the access to Key Findings. And then ultimately, we're going to access Key Findings as a Key Findings only user. So as a user who only has access to this specific location within MarketSight. All right. So Key Findings, as you can see here, is essentially a portal system in which my findings, my charts, my crosstabs, or even related documents such as Word files, PowerPoints, and Excel can be added to a portal and then shared with clients. To get to this point, as mentioned before, you'll need to have created items first. Now, in this case, what we're going to work with today is a dashboard that the designer on our team created. I'm going to load this dashboard here. This particular dashboard is, of course, a good representation visually, and it's very eye-catching, grabs the visual interest for my viewers. And if I want to share this with my clients, I'm going to want to see if I can do that in, of course, an online fashion, much better than, say, sending a PowerPoint deck that's static and that my users can't really work with. To add any item to Key Findings, be it a dashboard such as this or a crosstab or a chart, you'll first want to make and save that object. Once you have that item saved, you can then look for the Share button here, and the very last option that you see is Key Findings. Now you may be wondering what the difference is between emailing a link, showing a URL, and adding to Key Findings is. There are indeed some differences here. If you're going to email a link, this is not the same as adding to Key Findings. This sends an anonymous link to someone. That link can expire, but the key here is that it doesn't require a MarketSight login. So if you're looking for a more secure approach, this choice may not be for you. Showing a URL is more secure in that it will prompt a user to log in when you say copy-paste that URL in an email to them. However, it's better for a full access user, such as a colleague whom you may want to view the work or review your work. Key Findings is best for colleagues and clients that don't necessarily need to really work within the application. Again, they're mostly viewers. It has the advantage of having a secure login, so it's not out in the open. And again, it's a more managed experience. So let's click on Add to Key Findings to begin that step. Now, if I'm looking to add an item to Key Findings, at this point I have some choices that I would like to make. The first is whether or not to place this particular item within a folder. We usually do recommend the use of folders when working with Key Findings, if only because this enables you to better control access to the contents within the folder. It also helps maintain your Key Findings list, which can get long if you're handling multiple clients. So again, If possible, best practice is always to place contents within a particular folder. Now that I've created that folder, I'll simply select it, and I'll click OK at this point to add my item to key findings. That's really all I need to do. And again, that's applicable for any type of item in MarketSight. As mentioned previously, it's also applicable to any sort of related file that I might have within my account. So if I have, for example, a PDF that I would like to share, all I need to do is upload that as a related file. You'll see that there's an option for that here under the Upload dialog. But again, all I then need to select is Share, and then Add to Key Findings. So again, that Add to Key Findings is really what is that key step that places that item then within that Key Findings portal. So as a quick view here, again, we're looking at this as a full access user. I can review and I see that my folder and my dashboard have now been added to the portal. Now, of course, we need to consider the topic of user access. That's part of the point of key findings, is that we want to be able to control who sees what. The panel that we see here on the left-hand side is one of those areas where we are concerned, of course, can a client see these contents? If they can see them, can they get to them? And the way we address all of this in MarketSight is through the use of permissions. Now, in order to use permissions, of course, you need to have your key findings user set up. So let's take a brief moment to walk over creating a user and even creating groups, which are useful for managing multiple users at once. In order to do these next steps, you will need to be an account administrator. If you are simply a user of your account but not the administrator, if you log in and you click on your name here in the upper corner, you will not see the administration link. So an administrator of the account will need to take this step. Now, under the administration link, I will be taken directly to the users page here in MarketSight. I'm going to go ahead here and click on the New button. As you can see, we have several tabs here, not all of which need to be filled out in full for my user to be created. Generally speaking, we will recommend that you put in an email as the username. This does need to be unique, so we can't enter the same email that we might already have within the company, but as long as it's unique, I'm good to go. First name and last name will also be required. Finally, email address here is a very important field. Now, it may seem a little redundant because, of course, if I'm using my email address here as my username, why do I need it here? The answer is primarily because any login information and any email communication about the account is going to go to the email address that's listed here within this field. So that's definitely a key field that you do want to fill out, even if you've already placed the email address here in the username. When setting up a user, I of course do need to consider whether or not I need to know their password. We typically recommend that you do not set a password manually for that user because of course you're then going to have to tell them what that is, and it's never really a great idea to send passwords over email, for example. Typically, what we recommend instead as a best practice is to look for the bottom checkbox here on the Basics tab, Send Login Information. This is going to send a randomized temporary link to your new user, in this case, say a key findings user. When they click on that link, that's going to allow them to set up a password of their own selection, as well as a security question. So that way, if they forget their password, they'll be able to retrieve it in a secure fashion. Please note that it is not possible for any administrator or even a system administrator to see the answers to those security questions. So those are completely private at this point in time. All right, so we visited the Basics and the Password tab of setting up a new user. We're going to come back to Groups shortly, so we're going to skip over that one for the moment, and we're going to visit the Privileges tab here. This is a very critical tab for one particular reason, and that is right here. If I want to select someone and create them as a key findings only user, I need to make sure that I've chosen this box here. This particular box means that they will only be able to log into the key findings part of the application, as we'll see shortly when we log in as a key findings user. If I select full access, that's not the same thing. A full access user is going to count against my total number of seats that I see up here in the corner. And a full access user is able to see the entire MarketSight application. So he or she would be able to log in and actually do work, not quite what we're aiming for today. Similarly, a read-only user would also see the full application, which is, again, not what we're looking for. We're, again, looking really to keep that experience within that key findings portal, hence the key findings only selection here. Now, you'll note that there are a number of additional checkboxes down here further across this dialog. These are not necessary for a key findings user. A key findings user is not able to create any item within that portal, so we don't really need to worry about making sure that these boxes are selected. Subsequently, these additional tabs don't really need to be visited at all. So as long as you visited the Basics tab, possibly the Password tab, but of course, again, we don't recommend that as a best practice, and then finally the Privileges tab, you should be okay to create a new user by clicking OK. If you have any challenges creating a new user, please, of course, reach out to us at customer service to let us know, and we'll be more than happy to assist you in making sure that user gets set up as expected. Taking a look at my current list of users here within my MarketSight administration page, I can see that my users are, of course, listed alphabetically by name, but that each user is also the member of at least one group. So groups are an important concept if you plan on handling multiple users within key findings. The reason why is simply a matter of convenience. It is, of course, easier to change, say, a single group than it is to change the access for, say, 5, 6, or even 10 or 20 users. Since you can have up to 1,000 free key findings logins, we definitely recommend the use of groups. Much more of a quick process there. By default, you'll want to be aware that all users, when created, are placed into the general users group, as you can see here. Every single one of my users, whether they are key findings, full access, read-only, they've all gone into general users by default. Hence, if you wanted to control the permission access for a particular group or users, you want to make sure that you've created a new group that is not the general users group, again, because that one's the default. So let's head to the Groups page to take a look at creating a new group. There is no limit on the number of groups that you can create. So of course, if you need more groups, that's fine. As before, you might have guessed, to create a new group, simply click on the New button here in the upper left-hand corner. The name for the group is generally not going to be seen by anyone but the administrator who is essentially managing the access for that group. That said, we still do recommend giving it a relatively specific name, so that way you're aware of what that group contains. You can add a brief description for this group, and again, this one is going to be visible just to that particular administrator. Now, an advanced feature of groups that is not really within our training today, but definitely of interest, and you may wish to experiment with this a bit, role-based views. So this is an idea where you can filter data sets within the account for this particular group, and you can do so by placing in a single variable. So for example, if I had perhaps a variable indicating a store or branch, I could place that variable into the role-based views to limit the amount of data that that particular group sees. Let's head next to the Members tab. So the Members tab is not one that necessarily needs to be filled out immediately, but you can certainly do so at this point in time. For example, if I wanted to add some of my users to this particular tab here, that's not a problem. I simply select them, and then I add them to this group. Easily done. Now, as the administrator, I'm always going to be a member of this group. I don't really have too much of a choice there since I'm the creator of this group. In terms of permissions, this is going to be the permissions specifically to adjust the membership of this group. So it's not really strictly relevant to anyone who is not an administrator. Generally speaking, you'll more or less leave this alone. It's not really necessary to change. Last but not least, the Privileges tab is also one you can skip since we are focused primarily on creating key findings users today. Since key findings users do not have the ability to create any sort of item, checking something here will not give them that ability. So again, a quick review there. The Basics tab and the Members tab are the tabs of primary interest. So let's go ahead and click OK to that particular group there. Now, if you didn't add a user to the group at this point in time, say the user came along a little bit later, perhaps the user, came along the next quarter, the next year after the group had been created. You can always go back into this group by left-clicking on it to edit it, and you can also add users to groups back on that user's page. So if I open up my MarketSight trainee, for example, if I needed to add him to an additional group, I can simply come here, and there again you can see that group we created and other groups that are available. So you can always choose to add or remove users after the fact. All right, so far we've discussed adding items to key findings, setting up a new user, and setting up groups for that user. There's one last component of groups that we need to make sure that we discuss, and that is, again, if someone is part of the general users group, that is the default. If you're looking to restrict permissions, so again, let's say I don't want MarketSight trainee to see just everything, I'm going to want to make sure that not only do I add him to my specific group, but that I also remove him from general users. Again, general users is the default. I'm saying that a lot, but it's definitely something you need to keep in mind because as the default, they will have access to everything. So generally speaking, get rid of the general users. All right, so we are now ready for the next step in this process, and that's to make sure that my group or my users have access to the items themselves that I've given them permission to. So I'm going to want to do that in a couple of different places. First, I'll go back to Home. Now in the Home page, I want to make sure that I'm looking at the Datasets screen in particular. This particular page, I want to make sure that I'm checking out the left-hand panel primarily here. So with the permissions and the groups that I've just created, let's say, for example, this here is the folder and the data set that I want to grant permissions for my specific group to see. In order for myself to do that, I'm going to want to right-click and then choose Properties. Underneath my folder properties here, I'll see, of course, the name of the folder, and I'll also have the option to add permissions. Now, as you can see here, by default, lo and behold, there are the general users. So in this case, I might choose to modify that, and I might remove that general users group from this folder, therefore they're not going to have access to it. I'm going to make sure that I move over my new group there, and I click on OK. Now at this point, again, since we're dealing with key findings users, these particular settings here are not really strictly necessary because key findings will be limited to viewing only. That said, it certainly can't hurt to set this as view only. So I'm going to click OK, and I want to point out a couple of additional things about permissions while we're here. You may note, of course, that this is a folder type setup where data sets are located within folders. You can see, for example, the training folder down there has quite a few. This particular one has only one. Any data set that's located within a folder can have its own individual permissions set. You don't have to do this, and in fact, we generally recommend not bothering. The reason why is because by default, every item, every data set within a folder will use the folder's permissions. So since I modified that Millennials folder permission settings, I can see that my training group now has view access to this particular folder and this particular data set already without having to do anything else. So as a matter of convenience, we generally will recommend setting your permission levels on that top level folder rather than the individual data sets. That said, if you do want to set permissions on individual data sets, you are welcome to do so, but you may see that there is no modify button. How can you do that then? Simply deselect this checkbox here to use that folder permission level, and now you'll see here that the Modify button becomes available. Do be aware, though, that at this point this is no longer going to be checked, and so if you modify the folder level permissions, you will not see that change take effect automatically here. So do keep that in mind should you choose to set permissions on the individual data sets. All right, so one last place that we definitely want to make sure that we've checked our permissions, and that is back in the Key Findings portal itself. So moving over to Key Findings, the last page or place that I need to look at specifically is the folder that I want my users to have access to. Now if I right-click on this folder here, same sort of idea as that datasets page, I want to make sure that my permission settings are going to be, again, what I'm looking for. In this case, you can see that my folder is set up by default to have my general users, and they're not really whom I want to have access here. So I'm going to click on the Modify button to remove them, and then add my training group back in. So again, only my training group now should have access to this particular file. All right, so I've done this in two places now as a summary. We created the user, we created the group, we modified the permission setting both on the content, back on the datasets page, and on the access page, if you will, the Key Findings page itself. That is the essential setup. Now the question is, what do my Key Findings users see? We always recommend, if you have a moment, creating a Key Findings user as a matter of a test. It generally will help you feel much more comfortable with the process if you have a Key Findings user that you can practice setting up permissions with. For that purpose, I have the MarketSight trainee user created that I use for a Key Findings access. Let me go ahead and log into that particular user now. And it's definitely a good day because I remembered that password. But now taking a look at this, you can see that I'm definitely seeing something just a little bit different from that full access user. In fact, let me place my windows here side by side so that you can compare them more easily. So in the left-hand side here, I am logged in as myself and Schaefer as a full access user. On the right-hand side, I'm logged in as MarketSight trainee, who is a Key Findings only user. Now as you can see, items like training examples, I did not give my group the access to training examples. As a result, my Key Findings user does not see a thing about that folder. No clue that it exists. I did give my users access to the 32918 folder. So my Key Findings user is able to see that folder. They're able then to click on it and then access the contents within it. In the case of a dashboard, I may also need to check one last location. Let's go ahead and make sure that he has the access to the dashboard itself. I'm going to either right-click and choose to edit, or I'm going to choose the permissions option up here in order to access that. So as you can see here, as we did not add our general specific user group here, my Key Findings user can see the location, but he cannot yet get to the dashboard. Let's go ahead and fix that for him. So we'll add my training group in, we'll remove my general users, and we'll click OK. Now we'll confirm that change, and let's switch back over to our Key Findings user side and refresh our page. All right, so let's take another look here. And now we can see that our user group has full access. Selecting this object now, my user can go ahead and load it. And I'll maximize the side of the screen here. And as you can see, my Key Findings user is now able to access the dashboard and its contents. A Key Findings user is able to share, so they can grab a URL to copy to send to you perhaps or to another Key Findings user. And they can also export. So they could take this particular dashboard, for example, and export it to PowerPoint if they would like. However, that's really all that they can do. As you've noticed, the navigation here really is all gone. So that's no longer available to them. If I head back here to my full login side and take a look at key findings one more time, you'll see that also other options such as permissions, edit, delete, those have all gone. So my key findings user doesn't really have those choices. Finally, you'll note that there is a new button. However, the key findings user will not be able to use this either, so no worries about them accidentally creating some unintended object. All right, so in summary, we've done a number of different things here. We've looked at key findings. We've set up permissions, so we've created a user underneath the account administration section. We've created that user and then put that user into a group. And we've managed the permission level access for both our data sets and our key findings page. With the key findings user and the key findings page, I should mention that if you have 5 or more enterprise level licenses, it's actually free to get key findings customized. If you don't have 5 full licenses, that's not a problem. There is an additional fee for that service, but that can still be done. The key findings customization will change what you and the key findings user see. So for example, where we see the MarketSight logo and this dark blue, almost black color, that can be modified to better match your company branding. You could have your company logo and company colors here. Finally, the URL that you see up here in the top bar, where it says application.marketsight.com, this can also be modified if you choose to go with the site customization. That can be, say, your company name.marketsight.com, or an abbreviation. At this point in time, data security policy at our data security centers do require that the marketsight.com part remain there, but the URL can still be at least partially customized for you. All right, so we have a few minutes left here to take a look at some of the questions that we've received. So give us just 1 minute to pull a question here. All right, so here's a good one. When I see permissions on my data set, I don't actually see anyone to add. All right, so what they're referring to here is the step where we set the permissions on the contents. So say, for example, my 2018 version of my survey data set. Let's say I go ahead and I access the permissions here by going to the Properties tab. And let's say I want to add my group there, my 329.18 training group. Let's say I click on that. As I expect, I can then say modify. Great. But this is now what our questioner is referring to. They see no groups whatsoever in this dialog. All right, what could potentially be the case here? The issue at hand is that in order for you to be able to add someone to an underlying data set, that group must first have access to the folder that the data set lives in. And this is really why we recommend having different folders for different projects and different clients. So if I add my training group to the folder training, so I go into my properties, I select permissions and modify. I now see a list of users groups that can be added, so I'll add them here. So now that I see them here, they're at that folder level, so we're at the training folder level. When I click OK and I confirm that change, let's say I go to check that survey data set now. I go back to that permissions dialog, and again that's done by right-clicking, choosing Properties, and finally the Permissions tab. My group is now there. That's because I'm inheriting, but that can also then be changed. So if they were removed, for example, let's say we got rid of those guys, didn't really want to see them, but let's say we changed our mind. We wanted to add them back in for whatever reason. They're now going to be available to us. So let me head back to that Permissions tab. And when I click on Modify, now you can see that that group is available. So in summary, if you go to set permissions on a particular data set and you don't see anything to add, so there are no groups and there are no users here, make sure that those groups and users have access to the folder that that data set lives in. You might then see that it automatically inherits the permissions, and that's great. But either way, You'll then be able to add that user to that particular data set. All right, the next question that we have here, one moment. All right, this is a related question. The modify button is grayed out. That can happen. So let's say, for example, again, my 2018 survey data set here. Let me reopen that permissions dialog, and that's going to be happening by going to the properties. You'll have this memorized by the end of this training. If this folder checkbox here is selected, so in this case it's the folder training permissions, that's the folder that my data set is in. If that is selected, my modify button will either A, be grayed out, or B, I won't be able to see it at all, as in this case. If that occurs, check out the little checkbox and simply deselect that in order to be able to access that modify button again. All right, I'm going to cancel out of that dialog there. Let's see if we have any last questions there on key findings. All right, you do actually get up to 1,000. That's a good question. So in terms of the number of users that you can create for key findings, every account gets up to 1,000 of them. I've not yet seen anybody actually get to 1,000, but if you're the first, we'll give you a prize, I'm sure. All right, any other questions that may be relevant for everyone? All right, that looks like that's it. So thank you so much for attending our training today on key findings and setting permissions. This is, of course, a challenging topic, so we recommend following either the training videos or reaching out to us at customer service if you have any questions at all. Thanks so much and have a wonderful day. Goodbye.